Welcome to my World History Notes, where I'm discussing and reading from my book I wrote to teach homeschoolers called A Bible Believer Looks at World History, which you can buy on lulu.com, amazon.com, or the Bible Baptist Bookstore, or just follow along with me. Um, so we're going to start today with Babylonia, um, and I'm going to read. You would never know by looking at the waste today that was once Babylonia, that you were looking at the civilization that appears to have almost created astronomy, made great strides in medicine, made language a science, and passed on to the Arabs scientific and architectural knowledge. Standing near the Tigris and Euphrates today, you would be hard pressed to believe you were looking at the rivers that watered Samaria, Akkad, and the hanging gardens of Babylon. Babylonia was, some historians believe, the byproduct of the union of the Sumerian and the Akkadian. Babylon became in time the master of all of Lower Mesopotamia. Hammurabi is counted by traditional historians as the first great lawgiver and conqueror of note. Later, we will see how some Bible students believe that Amraphel, king of Shinar in Genesis 14, was this Hammurabi. Hammurabi is given credit for the writing of a code upon which all Babylonian law was based. At least we are often told this in high school and college. However, according to ancient Near Eastern expert Daniel Snell, as well as Bienkowski and Millard in their Dictionary of the Ancient Near East, it was not really a code and was, quote, not intended to be particularly to be a collection of all kinds of provisions that were to be enforced in Hammurabi's domains. Neither was it a reform of the various city legal systems that Hammurabi not united politically. You can see Life in the Ancient Near East, page 60. The so-called code is found on one stone monument found at Susa and was a model of his idea of justice, but there is no evidence anywhere that the code was ever enforced as law by any court. That's from the Dictionary of the Ancient Near East, page 139. One side of the monument shows the king receiving the code from Shamash, the sun god. The instructions are secular, but Hammurabi was smart enough to couch them with the authority of the gods, according to Durant. The the Babylonia that Abram left, represented a pitch of civilization which has never been equaled or surpassed in the Middle East, according to Christopher Dawson in his book, Inquiries into Religion and Culture. Although many would argue that Persia under Xerxes I would refute that conjecture. The constant competition between Egypt and Babylon and the occasional invasions by barbarians, Hyksos in Egypt, and Kassites in Babylon, for example, is revealed in the Amarna letters, in which the puppet kings of Babylon and Syria beg Egypt for aid against rebel invaders. The Babylonians worshipped Ishtar, goddess of immigrants and liberty, known as Astarte to the Greeks, the prototype of Aphrodite, and the Roman Venus, the same as the Egyptian Isis, Ashtoreth to the Jews, and also Demeter, Minerva, Diana with the Catholic Mary, eventually assuming her position as what they were all called the Virgin, the Holy Virgin, the Virgin Mother, Queen of Heaven, and the Mother of God. Sacred prostitution was as vital a part of Babylonian religion as it was of Canaanite Phoenician. Herodotus reports that here, as in Phoenicia and elsewhere, quote, every native woman was obliged to, once in her life, to sit in the temple of Venus and have intercourse with some stranger. That was from Will Durant's book on the ancient, it's part of a story of civilization on the ancient Near East, called page 245. With regard to women, their level of rights was lower than in Egypt or Rome, but equal to that of classic Greece or medieval Europe. Among the upper classes of women, they were confined to a certain area of the house and were not permitted out without a chaperone, in a very similar situation to Islam today. Egypt was known for looking down on Babylon as an inferior culture, and it is true that Babylon lacked the sophistication of Egypt. As Babylon eventually degenerated, young men dyed and curled their hair and perfumed their flesh, and as Herodotus declared, every man in his poverty prostituted his own daughters for money. The wealthier a civilization becomes, the more morally bankrupt it becomes. Babylonia made maps of cities such as Nippur, had knowledge of the sexuality of plants, something only rediscovered in 1694, played music on lutes, used clay letters, clay envelopes, and a postal system, and wrote in cuneiform script, a type of pictogram. They also developed positional notation based on the number 60. Their temple music changed from simple chanted hymns to a complete liturgical service with 5 to 27 selections dispersed with instrumental music. Glass was used to form objects and vessels and as a glaze for pottery. The Babylonia, the of Abram's age, was not a primitive society, but a rich cosmopolitan culture that traded for goods from India to Egypt and possibly beyond. Durant gives us a further warning, though, in our study of history. He says on page 259 of his first volume on the story of civilization that, and I'm quoting, reconstruction of the whole from a part is hazardous in history, and the writing of history is the reconstruction of the whole from a part. I would add once again to stick to God's inspired word for your absolute standard of infallible truth, not any historians, including mine, feeble efforts. We'll talk about Assyria next, and I enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of it too, and at least to spur you on to more study yourself.